Should we be saying our last names? I think actually somebody gave me that note a long time ago, and we just haven't done it.
No.
Should we try it?
No.
I'm Sarah Ash.
No.
It sounds like NPR. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women's Soccer Show. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Ali.
We are here to talk about the world of women's football, and we are coming out of international break. We've got so much to discuss. We've got She Believes Cup, we've got Euros 2025 qualifying, and we've got an incredible interview in the back half of this episode.
Yes, so we chatted with Skip Gilbert, who is the CEO of the US Youth Soccer. It was a fantastic conversation we had with his thoughts and feelings on the fact that players are getting younger and younger going into pro situations and the pros and cons of that. You know, as we said, we've seen Lily Johannes, who's 16, got called up to the US national team. We've seen Gotham have a 13-year-old on their roster and what that means for the game as a whole, as well as his experience in other sports and what he's bringing in with not only players, but coaches, referees, and also, most importantly, the parents of players.
That was pretty funny. Yeah, we just talked about the growth of the game. It was really fantastic. We're excited for you all to hear that. Before that, we get to talk She Believes. We get to talk Euros qualifying. We're really excited.
We are really excited, but something else we're really excited about is something that our editor, Mike, mentioned to Sarah, because Sarah's not seen it yet. I have. But for anybody who hasn't, the Copa 71 documentary that came out talking about the lost Women's World Cup, which was like the first one really, because it was before the FA legalised women's football, because they banned it on all of their own pitches and everything else. So it's about that journey of the lost Lionesses and the tournament as a whole. It's a cracking watch. You will laugh, you will cry, and you will, to quote Brandy Chastain, be very infuriated, because it was a very infuriating situation to see what these women had to do in order to get themselves to this World Cup. It's a fantastic documentary.
I'm excited to watch it. I believe it's on Netflix here in the United States for any of you listening and wondering.
It is indeed, so make sure you check it out.
But without further ado, let's get into it.
So we're going to start off with the She Believes tournament, which kicked off this week. It's like we mentioned, if you listen to our Patreon, there's been a slight change in format in the fact that it's now 2 semi-finals and then a final and a third place playoff. So we've had our 2 semi-finals. It was the first, and this is one we're going to talk about, sort of our game of the week, which is the USA versus Japan. Because it was a thriller of a game in some aspects. It was also a little dull in other aspects.
And I'll say we are going to chat a lot about the first games of She Believes. For all of you listening, this episode drops first thing Wednesday morning, and the second games are late Tuesday. And so that our dear Allie doesn't have to stay up until 4 a.m. We are recording before those games are over. So we're going to dive into the first games of She Believes. And along with that, England's first game and the first games of the Euro qualifying. But we are going to kind of like extrapolate and talk about these teams as a whole. It's all still relevant. But if you want to hear more about those more recent games, you can head to our Patreon, because we're going to do segments on all of that for our Patreon. But for this main episode, we're going to keep it to these. So yeah, Allie, She Believes Cup, the first game that it kicks off with for the U.S. U.S. takes Japan down 2-1. There's a lot to be discussed here, both within the game and like fun facts out around the game. Should we start with the around, and then we'll dive deeper into what was going on? We'll talk about U.S. and we'll talk about Japan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, first off, record-breaking attendance for a friendly for the women's national team. This game was in Atlanta, I believe, and the attendance was 50,644, which is phenomenal, because, you know, She Believes is just a friendly tournament. Let's get that clear. You don't qualify for anything by winning the She Believes. It's just a fun little 4-team tournament.
And listen, it's really great for a friendly. Obviously, that's not the record for the U.S. as a whole, but for the U.S. for a friendly, that's the record. And I think it's really great, especially with a U.S. team that's coming off of a World Cup where they didn't do so well, a Gold Cup that wasn't well advertised and thus wasn't really that well attended. But it still feels like there's momentum building for the U.S. And with all of that being said, for there still to be momentum, that's pretty fantastic. Yeah, I mean, so much here. Maybe just to dive into the game. Mal Swanson and Kat Macario re-entered the U.S. women's national team starting lineup for the first time in 364 days for Swanson, 725 days for Katarina Macario.
It warms the cockles of my heart.
It does. In these two players specifically, it's very clear what they add and the dimensions that they add to this U.S. women's national team. So let's just get into it. I mean, what a game. Japan scored within the first 30 seconds. Immediately, the U.S. go down.
I was going to say, did your heart like just drop into your stomach when
it
you
was
guys
just one of those
conceded
things.
so like literally I was just getting ready to like sort myself out for bed and it just came up and it was like Japan scores. I was like, it just kicked off.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I was like almost not paying attention enough to really process that it had happened. I mean, let's talk about it right now because we're in it. It was a great job by Japan to exploit the fact that Jenna Neiswanger was getting pulled way out of position, far too high. They had that long ball down the line, and it became a foot race between Tierna Davidson and, I apologize if I butcher this, I can't remember if it's Kiko Saik or Saiki, but what a goal scored. Perfect placement. And honestly, yeah, I was a little caught off guard, but at the same time, this is a new back four, not having played together all that much. It's Neiswanger, Davidson, Gurma, and then Fox. And that's just something that in, hindsight's 2020, they're going to be able to work on that. Neiswanger got pulled a little too far out of position. And that was it. And credit to Japan for capitalizing on that. But when all said and done, that was really the only dangerous opportunity that Japan was able to put together for the entire rest of the game.
I mean, yes, I still don't think this was the greatest game of football. Like, there were some brilliant moments, but at the same time, I thought Japan held it together well. We'll get onto the penalty in a bit. I thought it was a little harsh.
It was a penalty.
No, I'm not saying it wasn't a penalty. I'm just saying it was a harsh penalty. There's a difference between like a clear-cut penalty and a soft penalty where it could have gone either way. I thought it was a harsh penalty to concede.
I would agree. Listen, I'm not sitting here saying this was the greatest game of football ever played, but this was a fun game, and these are two teams that I think were playing a pretty high level of soccer. I mean, for those of you who don't remember, Japan were like the darlings in many respects of the World Cup. They were in the same group as Spain. They actually beat Spain in the groups. Whether Spain sandbagged that, we will truly never know. I don't think that they did. I think Japan just really came out with all guns blazing.
Yeah.
And, they flamed out pretty quickly, but this is a Japan that we've talked about for many years. They had such an era. They won that World Cup in 2011. They beat the U.S. for that. And then in 2015, they got absolutely stomped on by the U.S. in the finals. And it was kind of like from 2012 on, we started to see the demise of Japan. I mean, let's throw a stat in as well. The last time Japan beat the U.S. was in 2012 at the Algarve Cup. And we had seen them just slowly, the kind of like this linear trajectory downwards until very recently. And they built the domestic league again. They had so much youth. We talked about them so much in the lead up to the World Cup, Allie. And what they were able to do in the World Cup, they're really just in that upward trajectory now. So these two teams clashing like this, and we'll come on to it, but the U.S. kind of being on an upward trajectory now as well, clashing at this moment, it was fun football.
It was fun football. I'm being a bit harsh, to be honest, but it was fun football. I do feel for Japan. I think they actually kept the USA at bay and were very defensive attacking. I mean, the two goals, the Shaw goal, which we'll get onto, there was no stopping that. That was beautiful and phenomenal. And like I mentioned, the penalty decision could have gone either way, but to keep it at 2-1, I think we are seeing the growth in the Japanese game, and I think this clash, is gonna come back again and again, because I feel like Japan are growing into tournament football, and they have got these players, as we mentioned, their youth teams have done super well, and now those youth players are getting into the senior squad. And so I have a lot of faith for both these teams, that they're finally coming out of that little bit of a slump that they had.
I could not agree more. And I mean, you mentioned the Shaw goal. And you mentioned how Japan were able to fend off the U.S. for a long time. What I like that I'm seeing from the U.S., among honestly many, many things, is a lot of what we weren't seeing throughout the World Cup, which is that they're figuring out how to solve problems throughout the game. From minute 0 to minute 90, across the board, you look at the Gold Cup and then you look at She Believes, the team grows throughout those 90 minutes and they figure out how to break down defenses. And that is not something that they were doing under Vlatko Andonovski. There's so many positives I have to say here about the U.S. women's national team. It's kind of wild. And you mentioned the Shaw goal, so let's just talk about it. Obviously, Japan goes up 1-0 like we talked about. And then the U.S. takes it in stride. And after 5 minutes, the U.S., they have their feet underneath them again, and they are knocking on the door. And the left side with Jenna Neiswanger and Mal Swanson, they're just firing crosses into the box, so many chances. And finally, Sam Coffey steps in, steals the ball, dumps it off to Jaden Shaw, who just places it in that far corner. Jaden Shaw, we've talked about her, but it's never going to be enough, Allie. That was her 7th goal in 11 appearances for the U.S. She is not only putting herself in the history books already, but in this game, she was also playing a different position. She was dropped into that number 10 role. And oh my gosh, I absolutely love her there, because maybe the best team on the field is going to be the team in which Jaden Shaw has the ball at her feet the most.
Well, let's talk about that positioning, actually, because, again, not to rehash old ground, but the amount of times we have talked about what the US's downfall is your midfield. Your midfield was lacking for so long because you were missing key pieces in, like, Juliet. You were missing things. Now, it seems, you've got nothing but midfielders that could fill those spots and could... Either they've come back from injury, or if they're playing a slightly different position. I'm talking about Emily Sonnet, who, was a defender, has now been pushed forward as a midfielder and has actually found a really great niche for herself as that defensive midfielder. So now who? Who do you choose?
Yeah, it's starting to feel like it did in 2019, in that we have now a plethora of talent. And now the question becomes, how do you even get them all on the field? Now you have hard decisions to make, because they all deserve to be on the field. Rather than in 2022, it felt like we don't have the answers. We're looking for people to be on the field, but none of them seem like they are worthy or fit. And yeah, I mean, let's look at just the midfield. Players that we have seen in the U.S. midfield who are all viable options for those 3 starting spots for a U.S. team that plays a 4-3-3. Jaden Shaw, Kat Macario, Rose Lavelle, Lindsay Horan, Sam Coffey, and Emily Sonnet, who you just mentioned, and also, I have to say it, Corbin Albert. That's 7 players and 3 starting spots. And we'll come on to the Albert of it all, because I actually do think she's kind of like squeezed herself out of contention. And we talked about that in our last episode in a more in-depth way, but I think it's worth a conversation again, because of the games that have been played. But yeah, I mean, you said it. Suddenly, there's this plethora of talent, and I think it's going to come down to 2 questions. Obviously, in the Olympics, you only get a squad of 18. Who is versatile, right? That's the first question. The second question is who plays well together, because Rose Lavelle might be the best player on the field, but if you're choosing that Lindsay Horan as your captain, she's obviously going to start. They don't play well together. Maybe Rose Lavelle doesn't start anymore.
That annoys me, because Horan is your captain, annoyingly. And I would say maybe, not, I was going to say 9 times out of 10, but that's being harsh. I would probably say maybe 6 times out of 10, Horan is a liability for you. She sometimes has brilliant moments. 6 times out of 10, she doesn't. And the fact that she's your captain means that she's basically getting a spot because she's captain, because it's co-captain with her and Morgan. And I have no issue with you guys taking Morgan to the Olympics.
Technically, Alex Morgan is not a co-captain. She's just, I'm going to say it, Mama Morgan.
Don't say it.
Alex Morgan wasn't even called into the Gold Cup roster. Like, she is by no means like the chosen captain of the squad. She is the team's captain. She is the people's captain, is maybe what we'll call her.
Okay, we'll call it that. But it annoys me that she's not them, because I wish she was the co-captain, because I would take Morgan over Haran if you want that sort of morale building. So it does annoy me that Haran is most likely to get it because she is the captain, because I would rather have Lavelle in that spot.
It's such a hard decision, right? Jaden Shaw just played so great at the 10. Kat Macario, she's such a great 10 as well. The thing is, both of those players, they can be versatile. They can both play at the 9 anyway. So I can't imagine a world where they both go and it adjusts. I also just have to take my moment and say, once again, I was right about Sam Coffey. Just got to take it. She has grown in every single game she has been in. And that's saying a lot, because I thought she had a standout performance her first ever U.S. Women's National Team game. She was the answer to the number 6. She was it. She can hold down that 6 by herself. We don't need a double pivot when she's there. She is that presence. The thing about the U.S. is that their style of play, like what they're known for very much so, is a high press where they immediately try to win the ball back anytime that they lose it. And Sam Coffey is the start of that right now for the U.S. She is the one who starts all of that. That's how Jaden Shaw got her goal. Sam Coffey stepped in on that ball, won it back immediately when it was lost. So I'm so pleased with what I'm seeing right now and the growth. And it's funny because the selection process right now, Emma Hayes and Twyla Kilgore are doing it together in terms of who's getting called in. And they're making it look so easy. They're making it look like, what was Vlatko doing?
But we have to talk about the Corbin Albert of it all, because she did come on. I thought the substitution was sneaky, because obviously she came on at the same time as Macario. Macario got a massive cheer. I think you guys had just gone ahead. I think the penalty.
Yeah, it was also after a goal.
Yeah, I think the penalty had just happened, so you guys had just gone ahead. And so obviously everybody's excited for Macario to come back on, and then they sort of sneaked Albert on at the same time. I'm surprised she got any game time, to be honest. Her reception was less than great. There was a lot of booing when they realised that Albert was on. And of course it got acknowledged, Haran and Morgan, which is why I thought she was co-captain actually, did a press conference. I don't think they were the expected people, if I'm right. I think they just rocked up.
I'm not surprised at all.
I just think they rocked up.
I mean, it's captain and essentially, the leader of the team, who has been a leader of this team for a very long time. So they should have been the ones to address it. I'm glad that they were. I think we can get into kind of what they said. They addressed the media. I'll read this. Lindsay Horan said, quote, "We just want to address the disappointing situation regarding Corbin that has unfolded over this past week. We've worked extremely hard to uphold the integrity of this national team through all of the generations, and we are extremely, extremely sad that this standard was not upheld. Our fans and our supporters feel like this is a team that they can rally behind, and it's so important that they feel and continue to feel undeniably heard and seen." And then Alex Morgan jumped in and said, quote, "We stand by maintaining a safe and respectful space, especially as allies and members of the LGBTQ plus community. This platform has given us an opportunity to highlight causes that matter to us, something that we should never take for granted." Notably, Corbin Albert was left out of this starting lineup. Twyla Kilgore, the interim head coach, said that was a technical decision, had nothing to do with, quote, off the field situations. Corbin Albert did start 5 out of the 6 games in the Gold Cup. Either way, I'm really happy we got to see Jaden Shaw at the 10. I thought that was a necessary move that we needed to see. She'd been playing so well, and Alex Morgan had been playing so well, and so it was nice to see them play off of each other like that and have Shaw sit under Morgan. So whatever the reason, I'm happy we got to see Shaw there. Julie Foudy made the point on the broadcast that especially with an 18-person roster in the Olympics, these relationships between players really matter. And I think that's really eloquently said. And because of that, I do really believe that this will affect her career in this short term. And it should. There needs to be repercussions to such hateful acts. And we talked last week, Allie, so I'm not going to get into everything because we talked a lot about it last week. I texted you that I felt like I went too easy on her, but we were like, no, we're trying to give grace as well for people to grow. What are your thoughts on this?
I think I said that I did want her to still go to She Believes, because I wanted her to face her teammates, because at the moment she's in Paris, she's in Europe. She might come across Haran occasionally because obviously Haran plays in Leon, but she hasn't faced her teammates, and she needed to do that. Not just because of the homophobic, transphobic conversion therapy videos she showed, because the big thing was the liking of the Rapinoe meme. That you're going to be up against people that have played with Pinot on and off for many, many years. I'm specifically thinking of Haran and Morgan. You need to look them in the eye, and they need to tell you exactly why this is unacceptable. The only thing that annoyed me about the whole thing was them saying it was an internal matter.
I was just going to ask you about that because it bothers some people.
I got so annoyed because I'm like, well, what she did wasn't internal. What she did was public and everything else. Like, they're saying we've had conversations. I don't need to know exactly conversations. I don't need them to have been recorded and released and blah, blah, blah. But I need to know, what exactly did you say to that person? Was it a proper, and I excuse my French, bollocking? And did you properly lay out why she was wrong? Or did you do a slap on the wrist, don't do it again, at least publicly? I want to know how severe this talking to was.
I get that. I do. I get that. And I get why people are saying that this isn't an internal matter to, that you can't solve it internally because it wasn't internal. And I do get that. And then on the other hand, they need to take care of the locker room, and it does need to be solved internally. It can't be solved publicly. It can't be a public fight. It never could be, right? They can't battle each other in the media. They can't let the media into their locker room. Alex Morgan can't come to a post game and say, this is exactly the type of conversations we're having. They can't do that. There has to be something, and I might sound so old school when I say this, but there has to be something sacred about that locker room. Across the board on all sports, it just has to be. There has to be that privacy of the locker room to deal with it how they need to deal with it. And some things don't need to be aired publicly, and the media don't need to be a part of it. So I actually kind of understood when they said that they needed to handle it internally. Do I hope that then they continue to make more statements or keep us updated on progress? Absolutely. This should not be the last time that Alex Morgan and Lindsey Horan speak about it. But I do understand if they speak about it again that we don't get a lot of information. But it should be something that they continue to address. That's how I feel. The saga will for sure continue. It really will. But that's not the only game from She Believes. We do want to briefly touch on the first game of Brazil and Canada. Canada and Brazil drew 1-1 in normal time. They went to penalties. Canada ended up taking on Pens 4-2. This is always a fun game, Allie. This is truly one of my favorite matchups in all of international play. They just know each other so well.
They do know each other well. And so when Brazil went 1-0 up, when they did, I was like, here we go. Here we go. Because it was a quintessential Brazilian goal and Canadian mistake. And they married up so well. And that's why we have the Brazilian goal. Canada coming back. And then to win on penalties. As somebody pointed out, USA versus Canada in a final. Groundbreaking.
Let's hope it doesn't rain. But of course, if you're listening to this right now, you know if it rained or not. Because it is Wednesday morning, and I'll just remind you right now, if you want to hear anything about the Brazil versus Japan game or the US versus Canada game, head over to our Patreon for that. Over to Euros 2025 qualifying. Feels weird to say because it feels like Euros 2022 just happened. But here we are, Euros 2025 qualifying, and there is a lot to be discussed. Once again, I'm really not trying to just plug our Patreon a lot, but I think that we did a whole Patreon segment on how this qualifying works, so you can head over to that to check out how the qualifying works. But to make a long story short, Allie, Do you want to just very quickly describe the format? It's very similar to Nations League for those of you who are listening.
It is basically the same as Nations League, but basically all European teams have been categorized into Group A, B, or C. Group A is then subcategorized into another 4 groups, and they will,
A1, A2, A3, and A4.
They will then play each other within their groups. Top 2 qualify for the Euros. The rest will then go battle those that are in Group B and C to then get the remaining spots.
Perfect. That was the most succinct description I've heard to date. I love it. So let's kick it off by talking about Group A3. I believe it is. A3 is England, Sweden, France, and Ireland. We have coined it definitely the group of death. This is a wild group. And the first game kicked off with England versus Sweden and France versus Ireland. Let's dive into England versus Sweden. The Lionesses drew with Sweden 1-1. There is so much to dive into here. The reigning runners-up of the World Cup have had a tough go since the 2023 World Cup finals. Would you not say that?
I would say so. I think, to be honest, the World Cup was a rough run. The problem I think... No, honestly, I think the problem we've had is we haven't replaced some key personalities since the Euros, the last Euros, because obviously people like Jill Scott, Ellen White retired, and then we haven't really found those pieces back. Obviously, we lost Leah Williamson to an ACL injury. She's now just coming back. Millie Bright is injured, so she's not there, which is another forceful personality.
I mean, those are your 2 center backs.
Exactly.
Those are the 2 starting center backs right there.
Exactly. So it's been a bit of a rough ride when we're trying to find who can fill those voids. I'm not going to lie, this game was not the greatest game of football. It was very disjointed, and the only difference is England remained disjointed, whereas Sweden came back in the second half and were a bit more together and a bit more team-like. So, yes.
Yeah. I will say, people, at least that I was around, were very surprised that England and Sweden drew, almost expecting England to not wipe the floor with Sweden, but expecting England to win. Need I remind everybody, Sweden only lost to Spain in the semifinals of the World Cup, and then they beat Australia in the 3rd place game. Sweden got 3rd place in this past World Cup, and England 2nd place. So I think this is, a result that I maybe would have anticipated.
I would say a draw was fair. I think, to be honest, I'm surprised Sweden didn't take it. Sweden had the better of the opportunities in this game because, like I said, the communication in England. Let's talk about England as I'm on them. The communication between the Lionesses was poor this game. It was shocking. The conceded goal was Lucy Bronze not tracking back quick enough and allowing Ralph Float to get that goal. No communication between Merps and Bronze, which, allowed for that equaliser. There was a moment where Ella Toone did... Everybody's calling out Ella Toone for this cutback. I thought the cutback was beautiful. The problem was there was no striker up there to take advantage of the cutback. And if Russo had been faster, had been up there as the striker, that would have been 2-1 England. But she was still in the midfield by the time Tooney made that cutback, and it ended up going to Sweden. Everybody's saying it was a dangerous thing for her to do. No, it was just that Russo didn't get there quick enough. And Walsh and Stanway didn't really communicate. It was an off game for Stanway, which is rare, but it wasn't there. So it felt like rusty, like a team that hadn't played together for a long time.
Well, let's talk about that midfield, because you mentioned Keira Walsh and Georgia Stanway. Keira Walsh obviously playing that, number 6, that defensive center mid position. Stanway, so good at that box-to-box, number 8 role. And then Grace Clinton got the start as that number 10, if you will, or that dual 8, that other attacking midfielder. Grace Clinton, only 3 appearances for the national team before this, and gets the start for England. She's had an incredible year so far, playing for Tottenham on loan right now, and she truly has been one of the standouts in the WSL. How did you feel about her getting the start and also her performance?
I thought that was right. Honestly, I mean, if we're looking both domestically and internationally, Grace Clinton is on such a trajectory. We are literally looking, and I'm gonna be brave, I'm gonna be bold. I think we are looking at the birth of one of the next England captains. I genuinely think that she is up there. The season she's had at Spurs on loan has been phenomenal. She's a goal scoring machine. She runs that Spurs midfield so tightly and has beaten out some quite stiff competition to make sure that she keeps doing that. And then you look at how she does for England. I wouldn't have taken her off. I would have maybe flipped it around a bit more if you wanted to bring Tooney on. But for me, Grace Clinton is a absolute footballing star and genius, and was the right decision to have her start, because I do think she's going to be the next England captain.
Big words, but I don't disagree. I think United will be very excited to recall her from her loan.
Yep.
And add a little something to that midfield. Let's talk about the front three before we move into Sweden. Alessia Russo started in the middle. Lauren James and Lauren Hemp started on the outside. I think notably in front of somebody like Beth Mead. Let's talk about that front three, because I mean, once again, I think that this is kind of similar to the U.S., where you're rebuilding and you have to figure out what front three works. I don't really think that there's ever been an answer since Ellen White retired, and I think it's been in the works this entire time. So what did you see from this game from Sweden, at least that you feel like England can build on?
The answer for me is Beth England. Is the honest answer. I think Beth England should have started. I know she's not been in favour of Serena and the Lionesses, but again, if we're looking on league form versus, Russo's had an alright season at Arsenal. Has it set the world on fire? No. She's scored a couple of important goals, but it's not been the Russo like we saw at United, whereas Beth England has consistently, since coming back from injury, getting in there. She got the equaliser that ended up knocking Man City out of the FA Cup, that's got Tottenham into their first semi-final. She is pacey, she is quick. I think her and LJ would play super well. I like LJ more as a 10 rather than this front three business.
I do too.
I just think that works better. I mean, James.
Well, she's just so smart. Shots. It's kind of like how I like Jayden Shaw there. They're so smart on the ball, and with their runs off of the ball and how they're able to create space and what they see on the field. I just love them at the 10.
Exactly. So I would have James back a bit as the 10. But yeah, I think the answer is Beth England. I think Beth England needs more of a chance internationally. At the moment, it feels a bit like we're going by name recognition or going by past performances. But if we're looking at this year, Russo needs to go back to being a super sub.
All right, let's get into Sweden quickly, because there were two teams in this game. England and Sweden got a goal in the 64th minute. Rolfo, who else would it have been though, really? Rolfo put it away. Let's talk Sweden here, because I haven't talked about Sweden in a while, not since the World Cup, and I think I was going
to say because you don't, because it hurts.
Perhaps I didn't want to. No. Listen, we had a great chat with Hedvig Lindahl during the World Cup that I think gave me a lot more insight into Sweden as a team, and they still have that big barrier that they haven't been able to get over the hump of. And once again, the bridesmaid and not the bride for Sweden, and they're back on that journey to change it. What were you seeing from Sweden in this game that was different, if anything, from their performance in the World Cup? Because I think that is what's important. This is a team that we know that they can play well. We know that on any given day they can beat the best team in the world. But they're missing something. So something needs to change. So what did you see from Sweden here?
I will say one improvement Sweden made is defensively they were strong. Like the Russo goal was a slight miscommunication, but a bit like, and when we talk about France and Ireland, we'll talk about it with Ireland, and a bit like with Japan and the USA, is they learnt from that and they held on, and they were nullifying Kira Walsh. Kira Walsh barely got a whiff of the ball in her normal role because they were nullifying her so well. Magda Eriksson put her body on the line to stop so many shots. They were defensively really strong once they had that first little blip. So defensively, they are coming together. They still don't have an out-and-out striker that you can count on to bang 9-10 goals for country, because Yes, Rolfo got it and got that
Do you
equaliser.
think
But
Blackstenius could be that person, though?
I was about to say, because Blackstenius had like the most clear-cut opportunity to go ahead and put Sweden up 2-1. It was literally her and Merp. She'd beaten all of the English defenders. She was literally one-on-one with the goalkeeper, shot, and then went wide. Like, did all of the hard work and then missed. So I think Blackstenius could eventually get there, but then you look at who their top strikers were, or their top scorers rather than striker in the World Cup. It was a defender, and they kept doing it from set pieces. They still don't have that killer instinct striker.
It's true. It's true. You think about, like, what if you added Alexandria Pop to Sweden?
Yeah, you need
It's
that.
like, that's it. It's over, right?
Or-
you need that.
Or you need someone in the midfield that's going to do the work for Blackstenius to allow her to have that little bit of a clearer mind when shooting from goal. But at the moment, they don't have it. They don't have that out-and-out striker. So defensively, they've got tighter, they've got stronger, and they're doing really well. But up front, still missing something.
The other game to kick off Group A3 was France versus Ireland. France took it just 1-0. Allie, what were your thoughts on this game quickly?
No, but I think that was the key word, only, because they got a quick goal in 6 minutes. But then Courtney Brosnan and the Irish defenders, we saw Anna Patten make her debut in an Irish shirt, because obviously she's just signed over to Ireland from England. And Aoife Mannion absolutely kept France at bay. They had 21 shots, France, and still could only manage that one goal. And this group, specifically the group of death, I think it's going to come down to goal difference. Goal difference is going to play a huge part in this. And also, Katie McCabe came whisker close to equalising to make it another 1-1. This group is exciting, it's scary, it's death-defying. But yeah, that game, the fact that Ireland managed to keep France to a 1 goal is huge.
Let's go around the world. Around the world, around the world.
Euro qualifier Group B. In Group B, we had some thrilling games as their campaign to qualify the Euros begins. Wales won 4-0 over Croatia with goals from Fishlock, Rowe and James. Portugal eased a 3-0 win over Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Scotland were held to a 0-0 draw against Serbia.
Over to Euro Qualifier League C. In League C, the games were even closer. North Macedonia and Latvia turned into a 7-goal thriller, ending in 4-3 to the away team. That's Latvia. Georgia versus Lithuania ended 2-2, and Luxembourg edged out Albania 2-1.
And over to Asia. In South Korea, they have faced 2 friendlies against the Philippines. They have taken both fixtures 3-0 and 2-1 respectively, whereas Thailand fell to New Zealand, who netted 4 against the Thai side.
And finally, over to South America. Colombia took on Mexico in a close game this week, winning 1-0, whereas Costa Rica managed a more convincing win over Peru, 5-1.
Have you checked out Total Football Analysis yet? TotalFootballAnalysis.com provides research analysis on loads of football, including the women's game. Want all the stats in one place instead of drowning in a mountain of tabs? Want to explore key matchups and the tactics from both teams? Total Football Analysis provides the stats and analysis to help you learn more about the beautiful game. We have a special discount for listeners of the Women's Soccer Show. At checkout, type WOSO10 to get a full year for just €10. That's €40 of the yearly subscription. Head over to TotalFootballAnalysis.com and type WOSO10 at checkout.
And finally, we are going to insert here our interview with Skip Gilbert. He, of course, is the CEO of US Youth Soccer. We had an incredible conversation with him. Please enjoy. He gave us plenty of time to discuss all of the ins and outs of some of, I think, the harder subjects to discuss, and he was able to go there with us, and we really appreciate him for that. So please enjoy this interview with Skip Gilbert, CEO of US Youth Soccer. We are sat here along Skip Gilbert. Skip, the CEO of US Youth Soccer. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Ali. Appreciate the invitation.
So before we get into questions, we have to, of course, give everybody your background. And I'm smiling because I want to hear what Ali thinks this means. So before you took on your role as CEO of youth soccer, many resume and accolades here. You played soccer for Vermont. That's UVM, right?
Correct.
I love it. In Burlington as a goalkeeper, 2-time Division I first team All-American. And then after you retired from football, you worked in sports marketing for USSF as VP of sales and so much more, including other sports. Ali, do you want to take a guess what an All-American is?
This is mean because I genuinely have no idea. We've
got a lot of English listeners and UK listeners, so we'll just say it now. Skip, you're the one with the accolade. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, it comes at the end of the season. Typically, all of the Division I soccer coaches will vote for who is the best 11. And so you'll have a first team, second team, third team, best 11 of the college players in the country.
Skip, I'm so happy that you joined us. As I mentioned, you are CEO of Youth Soccer, or U.S. Youth Soccer. And let's kind of start there. Our listeners, I'm sure, know about USSF, the U.S. Soccer Federation, but probably haven't heard the name U.S. Youth Soccer and just how it relates. So maybe if you don't mind, could you describe just U.S. Youth Soccer, how it's connected to U.S. Soccer Federation, and then what your job as CEO of U.S. Youth Soccer entails?
Sure. No, happy to. And U.S. Youth Soccer is celebrating actually its 50th anniversary this year. So it's a nice milestone to hit. We are an organizational member of U.S. Soccer. So if you follow what is happening with the Federation, they have always kind of kept a little bit of a distance from the youth game. Their focus has always been on the national teams and being able to get the best 11 to represent us in international play. So 50 years ago, U.S. Youth Soccer became the de facto registration hub, the governing body, if you will, of youth soccer in the United States. And then there were others, AYSO is there. Years later, U.S. Club has come around, SAY. There's a number of them that are organizational members. We go from the grassroots player at 4, 5, 6 years old, right on up to the elite player at 19. So all told, we'll register about 2.5 million kids each year, which makes us not just the largest youth soccer organization in the country by far, but also one of the larger youth sport organizations in the country. And so our role is everything in between, from the very base of the pyramid, when players first start to kick a ball, to understand what it's like to be a player and to be able to gather, all of their skill sets to rise to the top of the pyramid. But then we also look at the same pyramid for coaches, for referees, and recently parents, since they need to be trained how to conduct themselves on the sidelines in the car ride home, you name it. And so from that standpoint, really, we see ourselves as a huge resource for just about anything connected with the youth game. And our vision, quite frankly, is not just to bring communities together through the power of our sport, but to make lifelong fans of the game. That's the important part.
I love that you've added the element of parents as well. I don't think that was around when I was playing. There were, I think, more cards issued to parents on the sideline than there were issued in the game when I was a part of U.S. Youth Soccer as a player. So that's really great.
Most likely.
Most likely, yeah. Obviously, we're here to talk about youth soccer in this country and hear more about your thoughts and what you're doing. But I think also we've done a lot to share with people who listen to this podcast about just getting into the game and different facets of it. Do you want to work in the world of women's soccer? And if so, what are the various places that can happen in? And this is a really great example of really being able to affect change at that first level. I mean, Ali and I have plenty of conversations about how the success of the senior national team is fully dependent on the investment in the development of players in that country. So we're so excited to have you here. I hope that we're not going to dive in too hard here immediately. Usually we like to have a little lighter at first, but I think we're just going to go for it, right, Ali?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because this is a conversation that is happening primarily, I'm going to say, in the States, because we have a different setup in Europe regarding young players, but something our listeners really are interested in is the fact we are seeing players going into pro leagues younger and younger. We saw McKenna Whitman play for Gotham at 13, and obviously with the announcement of the She Believes roster, we've just seen that Lily Johannes, who's currently at Ajax, at 16 has been brought in for her senior call up. So I just want to know your thoughts on whether that's detrimental to the game. Is it beneficial to the game, both as players and the game as a whole?
I look at it, at least from my chair, it's a little bit of both. I think it's great because it shows, what at the younger level, what's possible. So if you're a kid, the aspirational moment to see someone at 16 to step out onto a professional field and basically play even with all of their teammates and opponents is just a great thing, and it really can show you what's out there. And we see it, and again, you go between the women's side and the men's side, you see it occasionally in other sports. I guess it was Kevin Garrett from the NBA, where you see some of these individuals that are just so in tune with their own skill sets that they need to be out there right away. That's the benefit side. The downside to it is we don't necessarily expect that to become the norm. And so we have to manage expectations because, clearly across all sports, across both genders, you have the progression and that player development pipeline that, for some and for a majority, you have to go through. And in the United States, you go through your college play. And not only are you learning the skill set on the field, but also that characteristical development off the field. And I'll use other sports, baseball, football, basketball, hockey, where, if you start, and history shows that you start giving some of these kids these $1 million contracts at 18, by the time 30 and they retire, they've got nothing left. They weren't culturally ready for what's ahead of them. So, as much as I love to see the one-offs of players coming in at a younger age, I also think the long-term success of the entire sport pyramid has to kind of follow what has been tried and true.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that you brought in the other sports because I feel like this has been a conversation specifically in basketball in this country for a very long time. I mean, on the women's side, they had a requirement that they had to get 4 years of college. They had to get their degree before they went out. And that wasn't a requirement on the men's side. And we saw very different outcomes. Obviously, there were other factors there too. I'm curious, Judge, now because we're talking about this really obviously translates and relates a lot to what we had mentioned before we started recording, which is the difference in, for example, where Allie is right now, there's a lot of academies, and that's how the system works. You enter the academy, and then you go pro through the academy. And there's not as much of a disconnect of you play youth, and then you go somewhere else for your 4 years of college, and then you go pro. And perhaps it's more set up for younger players. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing has yet to be determined. Probably, like you said, a little bit of both. But there's a weird push and pull in this country, I think, because I think a lot of clubs are trying to develop an academy system, but then there's also the collegiate system, which is part of what has made soccer, at least from the women's side in this country, so fantastic and so great. I'm curious your thoughts, really. Is there a way for these two systems to coexist, to merge in the U.S.?
That's a great question. And it comes down to really managing the expectations. Because if you look at almost every other country in the world, there's a ministry of sport, and youth development is funded by the government. In the United States, we don't have that. Even the United States Olympic Committee does not get a lot of funding from the U.S. government, which is an anomaly within the world stage. And so what that means, therefore, is that the developmental process is going to be funded by the parents. And there's going to be a huge, there's always discussion on the pay-to-play model. It's ruining sport. It's doing this. It's doing that. Well, right now, under the U.S. model, that is really the only way you can go. And I get into this argument all the time where people say we have to get rid of the pay-to-play. And I'm like, you can't do that. That narrative is here to stay. But look at it and equate it to education. You have a pay to educate. And so there are going to be kids that will go to, I mean, I've had two that have gone through Ivy League, or you go to a Stanford, and it's, because parents are willing to pay for the child's education. But for every kid that goes to private, there's plenty that are going to go to the state schools or public education that the costs are much smaller. In sport, we don't have a public pathway. We have a private pathway. And so therefore it makes it, the discussion is always about, inclusion and how do we work with those from smaller socioeconomic backgrounds. And it makes the discussion, I mean, it's paramount in our priority mix, but it's really hard to solve.
I think that's a great way to I've actually never heard it described like that. So that's really interesting to hear. I guess the only thing we haven't touched on is the coaching side of this and your involvement in licensing. And I've dabbled. I won't say that I've spent a ton of time in that world. I coached for the Red Bulls Academy, but I didn't go through all of the licensing. But through that, I feel like I learned so much between the difference between, the U.S. Soccer Federation license and the UEFA license and everything. And I think the negative Nancy's on the internet are going to be saying that for the past however many years, women's soccer has really caught up in the rest of the world because the licensing is different and the coaching needs to improve in this country. How are you looking at the growth of the youth game and the growth of coaching alongside each other?
They really do have to be parallel paths.
Yeah.
As much as we're putting resources behind the development of the player, it's actually three paths, and it's the player, it's the coach, and it's the referee. And we can talk about the referees later.
We would love to.
Back to the coaches side. U.S. Youth used to have a certification process. It was the youth soccer license that most people thought was some of the best coaching curriculum in the world. U.S. Soccer has the licensing, your A, B, C, D, E. And at one point, U.S. Soccer really didn't want U.S. Youth continuing with that, and that curriculum kind of went away. And there was a lot of pushback over the years to bring it back because U.S. Soccer gets to the licensing to those that really want to make soccer coaching a profession, to the upper level of the pyramid. But when it comes to the developmental model, you're going to get so many kids at 6, 7, 8 whose first experience with the game is with a parent and a parent coach. And most parents aren't going to take the time or the money to go through a licensing curriculum, but they're going to be able to get the one-offs that they need to be able to run the right age-appropriate, skill-appropriate, fun factor the lessons that we can now provide to the kind of the amateur coach, if you will. So there's a real strong need for both sides of the equation. You need great licensing, but you also need to be able to get that developmental model so that the coaches are at the youth, the 6, 7, and 8s are at the same kind of mindset.
Allie, you want to touch on? You looked like you had something to say.
No, it's just because refereeing is something that we bring up all the time on this coach, because at the moment, and I will speak from a European perspective, is that in the women's game, they're not professional. There's like maybe 4 or 5 that I can name that are.
And professional, you mean
professional?
Being paid full-time to be a referee.
Full-time.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas I know for a fact that there are some that they do lower league men's and then will get offered higher league women's just because they may be free. And I just want to know your thoughts on, again, about the professionalization of referees and how that's going to help hinder, essentially.
It's a great question, and there's so many different directions you can kind of go in. Because when I talk to a lot of referees, and I make a point when we have our national championships or our regional championships to meet with all of the referees, because again, if you think about it, we can't play games without referees. You can play a man short or a woman short. You can do sorts of those ins and outs, but with referees, you can't. If you don't have a referee in a game, it's a scrimmage. And also, unlike players get to practice. Players get to come off the field and be met by a coach who's going to give them constructive criticism on how to do better the next game. With referees, they never practice. Their practices are your games. And also, when they step off the field, they don't have coaches out there. They're basically met by a swarm of parents and coaches that want to tell them all that they did wrong. Yeah. So the mindset in particular is difficult, but also you'll see the connection that we need to be coaching our coaches better to treat referees better so the referee development can get stronger. Because I've had conversations with coaches that they're going up and down the sideline ranting and raving at anything that moves, and they don't realize that in today's world that empowers their players to treat the referees with less respect. It also empowers the coaches the parents to treat the referees with less respect. And so, again, as I said, there's 3 distinct silos in development: player, coaches, referees, and we'll have the addendum for the parents a little later.
Yeah, but I love that you're saying that. I mean, they all have to grow together or the game won't grow. And we've talked a lot about how, listen, I'll just say I have one experience as a referee. It was intramural soccer in college. And I got yelled at by one graduate student and was like, we're done with this. This isn't how I'm making money anymore. So we have sympathy for it. And we also, we talk a lot about the professionalization of women's soccer and what it needs to grow. And part of that is better treatment of the referees so we can have a better pipeline of referees. So people actually want to get into that, because I feel like just fewer and fewer people want to be a ref. And I don't blame them, especially with the existence of social media now. You don't just hear it from the coaches when you come off the field. You hear it from the thousands or millions of people who also want to talk about you on social media.
And as a matter of fact, we could learn a lesson. You take a look at volleyball, for example. When kids go to a tournament for volleyball, at least with USA Volleyball, they're mandated that they have to stay after a game to be a part of the officiating corps for the next game. And so it's mandated that just about every kid that goes through volleyball at some level has a chance to experience life as an official. And part of it is because they want to be able the players to understand what it's like to be an official. It helps their education of the game, actually. And it's actually worked well. And they find that the kids that go through those programs, and they do continue going, really have a different level of respect for the referees.
Yep, this has been wonderful. I wish we had booked more time with you. I wish we'd booked double the time, but we didn't. So we're coming to an end, and we've got one question that we always end with. It's a fun one, I promise. There's no right or wrong answer. Allie, you want to take it away?
So, in terms of tournament, World Cup or Olympics?
Given my background, I can go in both directions. I think if I had to go first, I'd go Olympics, because I'm all about multi-sport play, and the Olympics gives you the theater of so many different challenges that the athletes are taking across a wide variety of sports. But given that I am a soccer player and I played at all different levels, I would have loved to have played in a World Cup. So selfishly World Cup, but professionally I go Olympics.
I love it. It's an Olympic year, and you get the soccer in the Olympics too. All right, that is it. Thank you again, Skip, for joining us. If anybody wants to find either more information about you or U.S. Youth Soccer, where can they find that?
We're usyouthsoccer.org, and take a look, and you can reach me. I'm just Gilbert at usyouthsoccer.org. So we're always available.
I love it. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And that is it for us here at the Women's Soccer Show. I've been Sarah.
And I've been Ali.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
This podcast was edited by Monkey Hill Media. Visit monkeyhillmedia.com for more information.